Testing 1, 2. Good morning, everybody in the room. Good morning, everyone. That's a bit better. Some of us are still needing to get our first coffee of the morning into the system. This is just a quick announcement to say that in 2 minutes, we'll be starting the program. 2 minutes, we'll be going live. Please always keep in mind that this is going to be a hybrid program, which means that we're in the room, but there'll be others that join us online. This is especially important for when you have something to say. Please always make sure that there's a mic in your hand. Otherwise, those that are joining online won't be able to hear you. So please get situated, and we'll be starting in a short while. All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you that have decided to take this morning off to participate in our program. Let me welcome all of the delegates that are joining us in the room here in Rosebank. And let me, of course, also welcome all of you that have joined this conversation through the online platform. It's not going to be a long program, but we certainly trust that it is going to be an impactful one. My name is Kathy Mutlahlana, and I'm going to be moderating this session for you. That means that I have to make sure that everybody plays nicely together. And most importantly, that we do it on time so that we don't go on for longer than we've been given room and time for. It's my pleasure to bring this important conversation to you: gender equality and social inclusion in the clean energy transition. We stand at a crossroads as a society when it comes to global energy. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that. We are called on not only to reduce emissions, but also to reimagine the systems that power our lives on a day-to-day basis. This means that this transition, if it's to be effective, has to be one that is included. And it's one of the core questions that we'll ask today. Who is included in clean energy conversations? Who benefits from the growth of clean energy? And who's leading? Who's behind all of these processes? This conference is going to explore some of those questions, and hopefully it will be a space and a platform where we can all share ideas, where we can spotlight some of the leadership. If you look around this room, it is full of mostly women, and that in itself says something, because we need to spotlight the leadership of women in this conversation, and also the leadership of marginalized communities. We have to ensure that this transition is not only just, but that it is also sustainable for those that will be impacted by it the most. We're going to use this platform, not one that takes a top-down approach, but rather one that is inclusive. And everybody that is not only in this room is standing here representing communities, representing agencies, representing organizations. And those people are looking to your voice to bring whatever concerns they may have to the table. And that applies to everybody that's joining us online too. So it's an open space. I hope you're all feeling free to not only be part of the conversation, but to engage throughout the day. Of course, there will be some ground rules. We'll get to those a little bit later, especially when we get into our panel discussions. I'd love that when you have the opportunity to speak, you use it as efficiently as possible, right? Let's not use it to make our keynote addresses. We already have that covered on the program. So let's bear in mind that this is going to accommodate quite a number of speakers. And of course, we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. The people that are joining us online, you will see that on the platform, there is a chat group that is opened. You're more than welcome to drop your comments there. Once the speakers are coming on, particularly in the panel discussion, you have the opportunity to also post your questions on the chat group, and we'll be able to field some of those questions to our speakers that are in the room. We wouldn't be here today without the invite of Oxfam South Africa and the International Institute for Sustainable Development. So let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you so much for hosting this event. It is a T20 side event and officially recognized as such as we look at gender equality and social inclusion in the clean energy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, with that said, let me invite onto stage our first speakers for the morning who will do the welcome for all of us here today. Tara Lan is with the IISD and Isabel Fry is with Oxfam South Africa. They will do an overview of the event and also talk about the relevance of the G20 priorities, and in particular in relation to South Africa and South African women. So I think one thing they didn't tell us is that they also wanted us to celebrate Women's Day. And we know in South Africa it's a big deal for us, right? No, ladies, don't lie. You know you have plans on Saturday. You know you've got places to be and people to see. We won't even recognize you. So happy Women's Month to all of the women in the room. And it's certainly great to be part of a conversation like this that speaks to the heart of our lives and how we power up our lives. On that note, please give a warm round of applause for Tara and Isabel as they come up.
Good day, colleagues. Isabel has really delegated this a responsibility to me. And just noting, I am not Isabel, I'm Kate Kochauke. Absheni Sanbonani Dumelang Minjani. I stand here today as a woman, young Black woman in Africa, who is equally experiencing the issues that we're going to discuss here today. But first, I want to extend a warm welcome to our keynote speaker from the Presidential Climate Commission. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our partners, activists, friends in the room and in the virtual space as well. I would like to also extend a welcome to provincial government representatives who are joining us in this important discussion as well. And lastly, just to also extend a welcome to our Oxfam in Africa representatives who have traveled this far to come and support this work. To kick us off is to really understand that the G20 is happening for the first time on African soil. And so that means that we need to capitalize on this opportunity to ensure that it delivers concrete socioeconomic outcomes for our communities, for Africa, and for the global South as we see it. It's also important for us to understand that the energy crisis is not neutral. The energy crisis is not incidental. And so how do we ensure that the most affected, women, marginalized communities, households who continuously bear the brunt of energy poverty are included in these policy discussions? As Oxfam, we identify as a global movement of people. And as Oxfam South Africa, we are steadfast in our commitment to unlock space, to bring the G20 to communities, to surface the priorities of communities as well, and ensure that those are amplified in the policy spaces. Now, to give a little bit of context, is that as Oxfam, and in particular, the Oxfam in Africa Inequality Report, which was recently launched alongside the third finance ministers meeting in KZN, highlighted that 5 of the most wealthiest men on the continent own half of the population's wealth. Let's stop and think about that for a moment. In 2000, Africa had no billionaires at all. But in 2025, Africa has 23. So that is to show you that we do have wealth, we do have resources. As we engage in the just energy transition, is to ensure that the just transition delivers socioeconomic outcomes for communities. This all happens, this concentration of wealth all happens while 850 million Africans experience poverty daily. So when we talk about solutions from a policy orientation point of view, let's ensure that these are critically engaging policy frameworks that seek to unlock spaces for economic participation for communities, but also engage in alternatives of ensuring that we raise domestic resources as well. Now for Oxfam, it's quite central, and you will have seen from the campaigns that we led from the G20 in Brazil and through to South Africa, that we are calling on a tax on the super rich. That is noticing that the repository of money is concentrated on 1% of the global population. The 99% of people are left behind. So this is a reality that we're wanting to confront as we engage these policy spaces, but also we want to ensure that climate justice is central to the solutions that we co-create. Over the next 2.5 hours, we'll be hearing about stories of change from the work that we've been doing with communities. We'll also be hearing from key policy experts who will be sharing some of the insights and work they have been doing to influence the debates as they unfold throughout the G20. Having said that, I want to end with this, that we need to ensure that women and households are central to the debates that we're having. We need to ensure that a just energy transition centrally delivers on positive outcomes for communities, but most importantly is focusing on solidarity building, coalition building, and ensuring that we bring the voices who are most impacted by the realities that we see in Africa into the spaces and into the crafting of solutions. As we always say as Oxfam, the future is equal. Thank you.
Thank you for that brilliant introduction. It's a very hard act to follow. So first of all, I'd just like to say some thanks. Thanks to all of you for joining us here today. Thanks for everyone online for joining us as well. Thank you to our partners, Oxfam, T20 and the Mail and Guardian for partnering with us for this event. And also just a quick thanks to the donors who made IISD's participation in this event possible, the International Development Research Centre in Canada and the Government of Denmark. So for those of you who don't know us, the International Institute for Sustainable Development is a non-profit, non-government think tank. We're headquartered in Canada, but we have a global presence. Now, I'm with the Energy Program, and we have staff and teams working all around the world, including in South Africa. Now, we have 2 South African staff members here with us today, Batondwa Vasi and Kudzi Mataba. They're just giving you a quick wave now. And so being with the Energy Program, we work on all aspects of the energy transition, and we try and include, well, we don't try, we aim to include social justice into everything that we do. And there are 3 reasons why we do this and why it's important in the energy space. So firstly, historically disadvantaged groups tend to be more vulnerable to energy poverty, to disruptions and transitions, including some reforms, and also the negative impacts of fossil fuels like air pollution and climate change. So this is why taking a social inclusion and gendered lens to energy is so important. So we see that it's very important to influence government policies to ensure that we don't exacerbate or perpetuate disadvantage as we move through the clean energy transition. But much more importantly than that, we actually see the energy transition as an opportunity to actively address disadvantage. And we can do this because there are new innovative policy solutions available, including financing options. There are new technologies, including distributed renewable energy and batteries. And also, we can do it through reallocating the vast funds that are currently allocated very inefficiently to fossil fuels to more productive purposes. So we're talking about $1.1 trillion worth of money that's going to fossil fuel support, and this is often going to the wealthiest, not the poorest. So we really need to use that money much more effectively and target it to those most in need. And finally, I just want to recognise that women and marginalised groups are not passive or powerless in the energy transition. They have agency, they have capacity to come up with solutions. We're going to be hearing about some of those solutions today, but they just need a fair opportunity. They need a level playing field. So IISD also works to ensure that everyone has equal access to energy infrastructure, including grid infrastructure, and they have a fair share of public financial support and resources. And if women and other marginalised groups have access to this, then they can create their own future in the clean energy transition. I'm looking forward to hearing about some of these solutions from our partners and speakers today. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for those introductory remarks from Oxfam South Africa and IISD. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get straight into our keynote address for this morning. Please help me welcome to stage Ms. Lebogang Molaisi. She is with the South African Presidential Climate Commission, and she's going to be looking at the just energy transition. This is for an equal future, looking at the actors, solutions, and financing. Please, let's make her feel welcomed onto the stage. Give her a round of applause as she comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you to Oxfam, IISD, as well as Mail and Guardian and all the event organizers for inviting me to participate in this very important discussion. I'll say this, my colleague Deepak Patel was initially approached to do the opening address here today, but I must admit, between him and I look better in address, so it was agreed that I would be a better fit for today's discussion. Having said that, morning everyone, my name is Lebogang Molaisi. I am the Executive Manager for Research and Policy at the Presidential Climate Commission. Prior to joining the commission, I actually have an activist background, so don't be fooled by the, I could, well, not here in Rosebank, maybe definitely in Braamfontein. I could definitely organize a really good march. I still know how to apply for Section 77s, and I still know how to get people onto the streets. So that's my background. I actually have an activist background, and this is really why the issues of decarbonization, climate justice are quite close to my heart, because this is where I learned activism back when I was in the trade union movement, right? So when I joined COSATU, people were doing really interesting stuff around, labor rights, labor laws, really important stuff, because workers wanted to talk about fair wages and stuff. And they gave me the task of talking about decarbonization to mine workers. Needless to say, I was very unpopular in the trade union. But what that experience taught me is that, issues related to justice and climate are very much interlinked. So even when we're having this discussion today, even though we're talking about issues related to climate, quite squarely, and when we interface the issues related to women, feminism, and all that comes with it, it's really around issues related to justice. So that's by brief way of an introduction. So I've been asked to talk about just a couple of issues related to women, as well as the intersection between the energy transition, and to maybe highlight how the Presidential Climate Commission has conducted its work in this instance. For those who don't know, the Presidential Climate Commission is a multi-stakeholder body that was established by the President to bring multiple players together, trade unions, government, civil society, business together, youth formations, as well as faith-based organizations to come together and talk about South Africa's transition to a low-carbon economy and to plan for that. The biggest contribution and the first was the Just Transition for South Africa, the framework that was established and adopted by Cabinet. What was important about this document is that it gave South Africa a unified vision of what a just transition should be and what it should look like, which was important, especially as South Africa looks to transition to a low-carbon economy. So this particular framework outlines national pathways for shifting to a low-emissions, climate-resilient economy in a manner that is inclusive, equitable, and socially just. This particular framework emphasized the need to protect workers, communities, and vulnerable groups from the negative impacts of the transition, particularly in coal-dependent regions, while maximizing new opportunities in the green economy. This framework is guided by principles of procedural, distributive, and restorative justice, calling for meaningful social dialogue, targeted support for affected sectors and communities, and proactive investment, skills development, infrastructure, and inclusive economic participation. Its goal is to ensure that the benefits of South Africa's climate transition are shared widely, leaving no one behind. I love that term. It seems to be the catchphrase for this particular discussion, and we say it a lot. But those of us who work in this area will tell you that, yeah, the route to leaving no one behind is quite complex and is quite complicated. So having had this foundational document around this unified vision of what a just transition is for South Africa, and having this really ambitious target around truly leaving no one behind, as the Presidential Climate Commission, we then sought out to develop scenarios for climate-informed economic pathways that indeed leave no one behind. So when looking at these scenarios and the development of these scenarios, we identified two extremes. One scenario where we have a business as usual approach, where we have an energy transition, we don't force for it to be just, we just continue doing things that we currently are doing them. And then on the other hand, we look at what would it mean for us to have green industrialization and definitely leave no one behind. Now, this project has been very interesting in the sense that we've tested these scenarios with a number of constituencies. And I must say the youth constituency really amazed me, because when we were having conversations with each constituency, we asked them to envisage what South Africa would look like in 2030. And in 2030, what would it look like if in our energy transition, we adopted a business as usual approach? And then we asked them to juxtapose that reality if we had a green industrialization scenario that was truly inclusive and definitely left no one behind. Now, the youth did something really interesting and innovative. So we asked them to imagine this world in 2035, and what they did was very revolutionary. They asked ChatGPT. And it gave an interesting story of what the year 2035 looks like in a world where we have an energy transition, but we've just adopted a business as usual approach and we had low ambition in terms of our targets. So having done this revolutionary work and painting a story of what that could look like, I decided to do the same thing for this particular keynote address, to ask ChatGPT what the promise of a just transition would look like if we adopted a business as usual approach. And if I were to incorporate this and apply it to what would that mean for women, what would this look like? And the story is then titled, The Promise of a Just Transition, Naledi's Story, and the Prospects for Women in 2035. And so it goes. In the year 2023, Naledi was 10 years old and living with her family in Seshego, outside Polokwane. The country was buzzing with new language, just transition, green jobs, climate resilience. Government officials, civil society organizations, and international donors gathered in conference halls to talk about how South Africa would shift away from coal, fix energy supply, and create a better future for workers, youth, and especially women. On television, Naledi saw images of solar panels, wind farms, and women in overalls operating new and big machinery. She imagined herself one day wearing that same uniform, earning money and fixing the world. But now it's 2035. Naledi is 22. And reality looks nothing like the promise. She wakes up in the dark, another morning without electricity. The old fridge her family saved for hasn't worked properly in years. Water only arrives every few days, sometimes not at all. In her street, unemployment is the norm. Young men spend their days hustling for short-term work. Many of the women stay home, managing households with too little income and too much worry. South Africa's energy system is in crisis. Despite bold commitments made in the early 2020s, the country failed to implement its transition plans. Coal plants were shut down due to end of economic life without adequate replacements. Procurement of renewables was delayed by legal fights, political wrangling, and inconsistent policy. Grid infrastructure remains weak. Load shedding has become permanent, a structured part of daily life. Businesses closed, food prices are high, public infrastructure is falling apart. Women bear the brunt of it all. With failing public services, unpaid care work has increased. Energy poverty means Naledi's mom must cook over firewood or paraffin again. Clinics have unreliable power, putting pregnant women and chronic patients at constant risk. Naledi's grandmother, who relies on insulin, now stores her medication in a neighbor's working fridge when the neighbor has power. After finishing matric in 2030, Naledi joined a government-backed training course in solar installation. It was part of a program aimed at bringing more women into the energy sector. She was one of the best in her class, smart, motivated, and hungry for change. But when the program ended, she was told to wait for job placements. Months passed. Nothing came. The implementing agency lost its funding after a shift in the coalition government. New ministries were formed, others merged, plans were rewritten, budgets were cut. The opportunity Naledi had been promised disappeared without explanation. Today, she does what she can. She assists her uncle fixing solar geysers in suburb homes. The work is informal, inconsistent, and underpaid. But it's something. She dreams of registering a woman-led cooperative to serve her township with energy solutions, but the local municipality's small business office hasn't processed applications in over a year. The online portal barely works. She applied for a youth grant twice and never heard anything back. Government commitments to support women in the transition remain stuck in draft documents and speeches. The energy crisis has made everything harder. Street lights don't work. Public transport is chaotic. Women feel unsafe. Heat waves last longer and the fans stay off. Food security has worsened, especially in single-parent households. Gender-based violence has increased in homes where economic stress and heat collide. Many girls have dropped out of school. Others, like Naledi, hold on, but barely. The just transition was supposed to correct these injustices, not deepen them. It promised equity, opportunity, and dignity. But under a business as usual scenario, when we don't take action soon, it has failed to deliver. Plans were not backed up by credible implementation, and governance was too weak to carry the weight of transformation. The green economy grew, but unevenly. Those with access, capital, and networks succeeded. Women like Naledi, without connections, money, or formal urban addresses were left behind. And yet Naledi is still here, still trying, still believing that the future could be different, that a just transition is not about shutting down coal or building renewables. It's about people, about women, about making sure that the next Naledi doesn't have to fight just as hard to be seen. In conclusion of this story, not my keynote address, Naledi's story is not a story of failure. It's a story about promises betrayed. And unless we get our act together with urgency and integrity, the just transition will become another chapter in a long history of missed opportunities for women like her, for women like me, and for women like you. I don't mean to dampen the mood. This is actually supposed to inspire us to act. It's actually I was meant to inspire us to act. But the reason why I wanted to do this and tell this story is because we seem to operate, especially those of us who've been given responsibilities, without the necessary urgency and agency. 2035 is not too long in the future. It really isn't. And if we don't force, and if we don't push, and if we don't act to make sure that the right policies are adopted now and they prioritize women in our transition, unfortunately, we'll be replicating the injustices of the past. Now to another project that I've been working on, which looks at what's going to happen to the labor market in our energy transition. That study has shown me that, okay, as long as we prioritize economic growth, and we have economic growth in the region of 3 to 4%, employment will increase in the long term. However, what I've seen in the short term with that particular study is that when we do impose climate policies and we do constrain carbon in the short term, there are unemployment impacts, and these affect youth, persons with color, as well as the youth. And this is because of historical issues related to low skills profile. This is why it is important to ensure that distributional policies are implemented and are implemented quickly so that we cushion the blow. We need to do our best to ensure that this transition is not a missed opportunity and we don't recreate the story of Naledi. And we can do this. I don't I don't want to leave this platform leaving people despondent. We can do this, and it's in the actions that we do today. So it's very important in these processes to start targeting issues related to skills development and training for women. I'm glad that skills development is the buzzword, and I'm glad that, especially on the coal belt, there's a lot of opportunities for skills development, but it has to be fit for purpose. If you don't have opportunities to offer childcare support, flexible schedules, transport stipends, you are not going to remove the barriers to entry when it comes to skills development. If there's no daycare or ECD program in the area, there's no way women who have children can participate in skills development programs. So have that in mind when policies are being entered into. Gender responsive public procurement is important, and please, public procurement that is not in the direction of the politically connected, but for those who are deserving as well. Subsidizing energy access for women-headed households is going to be important. There's a panel discussion that's going to talk a lot about these policy interventions, but this is important. I had an attitude when I saw an article a couple of weeks ago around how there's this new drive around clean cooking technologies, and I was like, women don't want to cook. I shouldn't have. It's probably me. I'm the one that doesn't want to cook. So women are not a homogenous group. And to be quite honest, we still live in a country where a lot of the care work still lies on women to do. So clean cooking technology is important because it reduces the time of having to do that work in the household. So these things are important. Employment equity in public and private energy projects is key, and it's important. Social protection, Isabel is here. In our previous life, we used to talk about comprehensive social security. Social protection is important. There's a lot of conversation around care credits for women who need to take the time off and take care of their children and raise them. You don't have to just do the 4 months that's paid by UIF. If you want to see your kids grow up until they're 5 years old, you shouldn't be subjected to poverty, as well as the ideas around community energy ownership models. These are important. We have a history of ownership patterns looking a particular way in this country. This is our opportunity to redress that and address it by ensuring that community energy ownership models work and they prioritize women and women participation more broadly and more meaningfully, so that this is not just a talk shop and a conversation that's happening in conferences. It actually breeds change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Lebohang. Wasn't she amazing? I think she deserves a much better round of applause. And it certainly is great to see young women at the forefront of such important conversations. And thank you so much, Lebohang, for that contribution. Up next, we're going to look at the work that has been done by some of the IISD and Oxfam South Africa partners. And this is really into getting into communities and trying to understand what is the experience of ordinary people when it comes to this conversation around just energy. What is the experience of women in relation to this conversation? The idea of leaving no one behind. We all know why Lebohang was rolling her eyes, because I think each time one of us hears that, we have to resist the temptation to not roll our eyes. Why? Because it's something to throw at the problem. It's once I've said it, then I've covered my bases. We can go on business as usual. But there has to be so much intentionality behind that statement of saying we are truly going to leave no one behind. And it has to resonate with not only the people who hear it, but it must be followed by the requisite action that shows that truly no one is being left behind. And in the spirit of that, we're then going to hear from Cindy Shigoli, who is with Sun Culture. Cindy is going to be reflecting and reviewing tangible policy and community solutions. Tracy Leisure, who is with Perry, she'll also be doing the same. And then we'll also hear from Mamusweu Tswabi, who is with the Serapeng Sadiklari Environmental MPC, and they'll be speaking about unlocking inclusive policy making. So on that note, let me allow Cindy to come on stage and take over. I understand that there's also a short film that's going to set the context for the session that's going to be played. So I'm going to ask that we please play the film, and then after that, Cindy will take over.
My name is Mamusweu Tswabi from Watterdal, from the organization called Serapeng Sadiklari and Environment NPC. Serapeng Sadiklari, we are women, 7 women doing farming. We're doing vegetable production, herbal production. We're doing the cooking back, the alternative energies. All those things, we are trying our level best to make sure that they sustain us. So my dad decided to come here to buy a plot. So that's how I come in Watterdal. I fell in love with agriculture because I saw many people who were surviving with agriculture. So that's when I started doing farming activities. Watterdal community are people, most of them, actually 90% of them, they are not working. They always roaming around the street, and that concern me that people are just, it seems like they have nothing to do actually, and when there's a poverty. So that's when I decided that because I was an activist already by that time, so I started to motivate them. We don't have electricity. For those who have electricity, electricity, they don't get access to electricity the way they're supposed to because of the load shedding. There were the community that will just complain and do nothing about the issue. Most of the time, they will think that some issue they must is councillors' issues. But after Serapeng Sadiklari came, now community, they know that whenever they see something that is not okay, they stand up, especially for those who are committing climate crime. Watterdal is under Mfuleni municipality. It's the laziest municipality in the world. So where you get service, I don't know, like when. Only the service that we get when we approach election time, paying rates and taxes, but we are not getting those services that we are paying for. We went back to the community and we educate them about the climate change because most of them never knew about the climate change. So we mobilize them, then we teach them about the climate change and how can we prevent climate change from going on. So Serapeng Sadiklari, we believe that if we want to talk about just transitioning, we also need to be involved. We need to be involved. And just transition must start from the bottom. We have a kitchen there. So the kitchen is using a gas stove. So instead of us using BP gas or LPG gas, now we are producing our own green methane gas for cooking. Because we know that most of women are struggling for just cooking. We don't have electricity, especially people who are staying that side. They don't have electricity, but we have electricity infrastructure. So that's why we have come up with this alternative energy. So you feed it. This is the inlet. It's where you feed it. So the feed go inside this pipe. Then it's going to be stored inside your stomach. And then when your greens are being digested, they start to produce your methane gas. So the methane gas, because it's a gas, it's lighter than those the feeding that you are putting inside there. It's going to be on top, then it's going to be released through this pipe straight to our kitchen. And this is an outlet. So when the enough methane gas is being produced in here, then the methane gas is going to start to press those liquid down. So when it presses it down, it's going out from this into this outlet. So this outlet is where we are going to harvest the sludge. So that sludge, we are going to use it for our gardening. So in Serapeng sa ditlhare, we do have youth, and we don't believe that youth is our future. Youth is now, because the future, it will be late. We have days where we call community, then we showcase the alternative energy. We show them how parabolic, for example, how parabolic is working with the sun, how biogas digester is working, so that they are able to see this thing happening in action, actually. So we also have trainings where we call community and train them how to design all those alternative energy that we have skills with. So that's how we get our community involved, and we also encourage them to use the available materials. For example, with a cooking bag, we have a program where women will come with their old materials. Like, for example, if they have an old dress that are made from the fabric that is heat tolerant, we ask them to bring that dress or a bedding, old beddings. Then we train them how to use, how to design the cooking bag. So at the end, that women will be having a cooking bag, going back home using that cooking bag. Then with that skill of designing cooking bag, women will be able to design the cooking bag. They will be selling that cooking bag. They will get money to buy their necessity. So by doing so, meaning we empower that woman to open even her own business, cooking bag business. The community 5 years from now, I think I see them being able to create their own alternative energy or their food gardens, being able to sustain themselves. It can be energy-wise, it can be food-wise. So I see them being able to do that, being able to be off-grid of Eskom.
Good morning, everyone. Isn't it just wonderful seeing women getting solutions for their own local problems? I am even more excited to see a solution that I've seen my mother use back in Kenya, also being utilized here in South Africa. We also used to have this cooking bag growing up, so quite amazing. My name is Cindy Shiguli, as I have been introduced. But after hearing the very inspiring keynote opening remark for the session by Ms. Mulaisi, I feel like I should be called Naledi, so please call me Naledi, because Naledi's story is very close to my heart. I feel like I am Naledi. I have lived Naledi's story, and that gives me all the more energy and excitement to be having this conversation today here about what Sun Culture does. So my name is Cindy Naledi. I am the head of environmental, social governance and impact for a company called Sun Culture Limited. So what Sun Culture does is that we develop solar irrigation solutions, and our target is smallholder farming households. So how we do this, we have an internal product department that goes out to the field and finds out what the people need. So our solution is solar, but we give smallholder farmers what they need to thrive. So we develop solar systems that enable irrigation to enable food security. And our focus is to move the world from climate variability to sustainability. So we are shifting people from the use of diesel-powered generators, which are the more popular irrigation solutions for most smallholder farmers because of the low cost of procuring these systems. So we are enabling farmers get solar irrigation kits that will displace the diesel-powered generators. In this way, enabling resilience to the climate change effects. So the person who's running the slides could just, oh, okay, thank you. So I will start with a fun fact. So in Africa, we have over 700 million people living on smallholder farms. So what's interesting is that only 4% of these people are on irrigation. So a whole 96% is dependent on rain-fed agriculture, which most of us know does not work for us anymore, given the impact of climate change and how it is impacting seasonalities. So we used to know initially that this season had rainfall. So, we are planning for planting a week before the rainfall comes, but not anymore. We're not able to do this. And as a result of this, we're having very high rates of crop failures. So this is where the Sun Culture solution comes in. We want to enable all year round farming. So we want to give you a solution for your irrigation needs to enable you plant throughout the season. And what this has resulted in is that we are able to now allow farmers to venture into crop diversification, and they get resilience from climate shocks. And then as a result of this, we are having farmers report up to double increases in yields, and we are also boosting household incomes. So as a financial inclusion, with a financial inclusion angle, we have a pay-grow model for procuring these systems. So an issue that we know is a very big issue in the procuring of, or the transition from diesel-powered or unsustainable energy sources to solar is affordability. So with our pay-grow system, we are able to solve for the problem of affordability. And how do we do this? We provide for tiered payment plans for smallholder farmers. So while we know that it might be a bit costly to procure a solar system, enabling farmers pay for the systems over a period of time has seen transition being a lot easier. So the pay-grow model provides for an opportunity for farmers to put down a down payment of about 5% or less than 5% of the solar system costs, and then they're able to pay for this within a stipulated period of time. It goes up until about 3 years, making it a lot more bearable, even cheaper than diesel-powered generators, if I may say so myself. And then it also opens access for thousands of unbanked farmers. We know how access to credit is a whole issue for smallholder farmers because they lack securities. Financial institutions are less likely or happy to listen to, whatever collateral they could have for acquiring credit. So Sun Culture tries to solve for this. And then we are also enabling farmers build credit histories, which they can use to procure other sources of credit. And then with all this, there's a very heavy inclination to gender. So Sun Culture tries to enable the women to procure these kits just as much as they're doing it for men. So with environmental stewardship, this one is automatic. We are developing and distributing solar irrigation kits, and for this reason, we are eliminating dependence on fossil fuels and cutting down greenhouse gas emissions and reducing pollution, and in turn, aligning to national and global green energy targets. So what is the gender dividend? So what does Sun Culture do for women on their portfolio? So we are enabling time saving. How do we mean? Women in the African setting are known to be the ones that are responsible for domestic issues, right? So they are required to know where food is meant to come from. They are responsible for the preparation of the food. They're responsible for cleaning, and all this requires water. So we are enabling women save time, and from data, because we are heavily inclined to impact. So we will collect a lot of impact data, and we have found that using the SunCulture solution enables the saving of between 5 to 17 hours per week. We are also boosting health benefits because, as we know, the use of diesel-powered generators has some respiratory issues, indoor pollution for the people who are involved in this domestic duties. We are also improving the quality of life. We are enabling financial inclusion, as I have discussed before. There's food security, and then there's also reduced drudgery. So too much, exertion and very difficult work for women is also getting reduced as a result of this solution. And then there's also training, because in distribution of the kits, we also interact with our female farmers. We teach them how to use the kits. We teach them how to do quick fixes and diagnosis of problems that are there. And with this, there's a decision-making ability for women within households, because, being the ones that run the day-to-day operations of these pumps, they're able to make decisions and have a voice within the household. So in partnership with IISD, SunCulture has been able to increase its product offering. So how is this? We have solar panels and we have the water pumps. But the panels and the batteries that we supply as part of our system have a lot more capacity to do a lot more for the people who are using them. And as a result, we explored clean cooking. This is through the introduction of an cooking pressure cooker that is dependent on the energy stored within the SunCulture battery. So the pilot targeted about 460 rural households across Kenya. And from the findings that we picked was that the system was very well liked. Women were happy with it. It was dependable. And it resulted in a reduction in the use of biogas and LPG. And there was also a very strong uptick owing to the elevated costs of fuel, as well as the high availability of solar, being that Kenya is a sub-Saharan country. So there's a lot of solar that can be utilized. However, we had a couple of lessons that we learned from it. Lessons that can be looked at very positively, because with lessons we are able to build ways to enable this solution be a lot more impactful. So we found that tiered financing is very crucial, given that affordability is a key issue. So there was a decline in willingness to pay with increased costs. So the solution is either to have the costs, the products being very low cost, or providing a solution that enables the procurement of these kits more easy to customers. We also learned that adoption is not necessarily indicative of behavior change, and that a lot more effort and education and awareness creation is required to enable adoption. So people will adopt, but may still want to substitute the clean cooking with other additional fossil fuels. So being able to teach them how to transition is something that's very important. We also learned that leveraging on high satisfaction rates would be very key in enabling transition. So how is this? Get customers that have reported satisfaction, which was a large percentage of the customers that were within the pilot. So depending on them to create awareness and create traction and conversation around what the clean cooking can do for them would enable a lot more transition. And then targeting women in training, financing, and marketing would definitely boost adoption, given that they are the affected party, going in through them to create awareness among the other women and other community members was a key factor. After sales support matters. Community partnership also accelerates scale, and then support for research and design for greater efficiency is key. And then subsidies would go a very long way in enabling the clean transition. And yeah, that is what the The pilot, the e-cooking study pilot, enabled us takeaway, and this is what the impact that Sun Culture has seen as a result of e-cooking and pretty much transition from non-renewable energy sources to solar and cleaner energy sources has been able to show us over time. And this is the vision and the mission of the company, and we are happy to be part of this conversation and hope to continue partnering and collaborating. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. My name is Not Nkateko. I'm Isabel from Oxfam, and I'm just here to ask a few questions of Mama Swai before Tracy is the last person on this panel. So firstly, I just want to congratulate you. That was an incredible presentation, and thanks to, can we have Lerato from Oxfam standing up, who was the movie maker? Thank you. So I'm not sure about, there we go. No, I'm not gonna do it. So just in conversation, the idea of renewable energy, would you say that this is now something which you are able to share amongst many people? So has it transformed the way as a community activist you see your role?
Thank you. Good morning again. My name is Mamswe Utswabi from Serapeng Saditlari and Environment NPC. As my community, we see this alternative energy being actually being possible. As long community understand what does it mean, and as long they are not left behind, because most of the time we talk about just transition, but we forget about people that we staying with them in the community. So in Serapeng Saditlari, we realized that the only time that we are going to win this climate change is when we involve people, the local people. How do you involve them? By making sure they understand what is the cause of climate change and how can they be involved to make sure that they are not continuing to do the pollution or to absorb the existing carbon. It can be through energy, it can be through farming. So that's what we do in Serapeng Saditlari. So we do train community, mostly women. Our focus is training women how to design their own alternative energy, because we know that when it comes to energy poverty, women are mostly affected, because in some areas we do have electricity infrastructure, but not everyone can access the electricity. And for those who can access the electricity, it's become expensive for them. So some, they only use Eskom electricity only for lights. So for cooking, they will use wood, meaning they will be cutting trees to make sure that they keep their house warm. So if they use this alternative energy, then they are going to stop cutting those trees, because we know the trees are very important for carbon, even to make sure that we don't have a soil erosion. So when you start educating them, then they will know. And in Serapeng Saditlari also, we train women to identify the carbon plants, the grass, because most of the time when we clean our yard, we just remove everything, not knowing that we have our native grass that is very important to make sure that our soil are not eroded, and to make those grass also, they are able to absorb the carbon. Then it's going to trap that carbon into the roots. Then that roots will release that carbon, will
convert that carbon into oxygen in the morning. So that's why we're saying people must be taught. Yes.
Well, I think we can all put our hand up for having learned something just from that. So thank you. And I don't want to, I mean, I think you spoke a lot on the movie. I would like you to show us, please, about this next to you, the hot box. I remember my mom using it in the 1980s, just in terms of being able to save time as well as cooking, but we'll hear about it. And then if you could also just let us know about the products that are here for sale and how people can buy them afterwards. But if you could just show us.
Okay, this is it's a cooking bag. The reason we call it a cooking bag is because it helps you to finish your cooking. So inside this cooking bag is a polystyrene foam. So the story, okay, before I talk about the story about the bag, is the skills of how to design the cooking bag. We got it from Gender CC Joburg. So I think it's very important for them to know that after, it was in 2016 when we received this training. So the aim was to make sure that we also educate more communities. So that's why we have this skill as Serapeng Sadita. We got it from Gender CC Joburg. So this cooking bag, the story is that we all know that waste pickers, when they go to landfill, they collect plastics, steels, cans, but they are not collecting a polystyrene. So the polystyrene is that substance that you find inside maybe when you buy a fridge, a new fridge, that white stuff that prevent fragile things from breaking. So that polystyrene, people are just throwing it away. And when they get into the landfill, the waste pickers, they burn that polystyrene and it releases some harmful chemicals. So that's when, as Serapeng Saditlari, we went to the landfill, we started collecting that polystyrene, we shred it, we even designed a shredding machine, a polystyrene shredding machines. So we shred it into a foam so that we are able to design this cooking bag. So before, if you have to sell this cooking bag, this size, it was going to cost you about 200 to design it. So meaning it was going to be expensive. But now, because we are able to collect our own and shred it, now it goes, it's 300 rands because it's cost us less than 300 to design it. And also that enables us to train women for free. They only come with their own materials, then we are able to train them free of charge how to design this cooking bag. So this cooking bag, you only, let's say maybe you want to cook things that takes longer. You only let it boil for 20 minutes, then you don't remove the lid, you just take your pot you remove your pot from the stove, you put it inside this bag, you close it. So because this bag has this insulin, this polystyrene foam, it's going to stay on that same temperature for about 6 hours. So that's why it is able to finish your cooking. So you can use it to finish your cooking or to keep your food warm. Yes. So yes, we train women how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And please, will you visit the stand and also support by purchasing? And I'm sure that you're also available for people to make contact if they would like to have further learnings. So can we give a round of applause to Mama Swai and the SETI Bank? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that. It was sort of an all-in-one, right? We got a film, we got a live exhibition. Wonderful, wonderful work really taking place in this space. I'm excited to see what it is that you're doing in Mfuleni. And nobody needs to be told about the disaster that is that municipality, right? So really kudos to you as a community for coming up with such innovative solutions, because I don't know that those problems are about to be fixed anytime soon. On that note, let me invite Tracy Leisure to come on stage and give us her portion of the presentation before we break for a very short tea session.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have a fancy movie or an interesting exhibition. I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the research work that we've been doing with IISD, which is around public participation in the just energy transition in Mpumalanga, trying to understand how public participation is working or not working and why. And we've spent over a year in various communities in Mpumalanga, spending time in Kamati, but also in multiple other places around the province. And what we found is we found two very different points of view between communities and organizations like the Presidential Climate Commission. So we'd be talking to communities and people would say to us over and over again, we haven't been consulted about the energy transition. We haven't been consulted. We haven't been consulted. And then when we would speak to people that were involved with the PCC or involved in other things, they'd say, but we've been to so many, we've had so many community meetings. We've met with this community over and over again. And what we realized is that when people said we haven't been consulted, they didn't mean we haven't been in a meeting. What they meant was we haven't been heard. Our lives have not been heard. People would say to us, they'd say, you know, people come and they give us a presentation, and then it's not that we're too stupid to understand the presentation. We understand everything that's in the presentation. The problem is that there's nothing in the presentation that is actually important for us. There's nothing in the presentation that actually reflects what is most important for this community and what we actually want to know. So when we ask people questions like, what's going to happen to our school? What about the children in the community? People don't have any answers. So then the question is to say, okay, if we have this groundbreaking just transition framework, which specifically talks about procedural justice and the fact that everybody has to be included in making decisions, and that the Presidential Climate Commission is very much focused on delivering that, what has happened? What is broken down there, and how could we change that? And the reality is that we've got this idea of delivering procedural justice, but in fact, the practice of that, the administrative practices of the state in procedural justice have just fallen back on what you could think of as policy-making business as usual. And the way in which policy gets made in South Africa and the role of public participation in that is much the same. Okay, what happens is that a group of experts and a small group of public servants decide what the problem is to be solved. They bracket what the problem is, whether that is food security, child malnutrition, or what is important in an energy transition. They decide what the problem is. They then get more experts to design a solution for that problem, and then they go and do public participation on the solution, which essentially means presenting that solution to communities. And even when we take a bit further back and say, okay, we're not going to design all of the solution, there already is a very clear understanding of what's in the problem and what's outside the problem. So that we're talking to people about things that don't reflect the reality of their lives. And we see this in policymaking all across South Africa. We don't just see it in the energy transition. One example I like to use often because it's very relevant is the way in which nutrition education is used as the solution for child malnutrition. okay, that we have to educate parents about what they should feed their children. That's not the problem. The problem is that people can't afford to buy the food to feed their children proper nutrition. But because no people who are actually struggling every day to feed their children are included in problem definition, we have these solutions that don't match the problem. So what we do then is we dress up failure as success. We say we're delivering all this, but we're not actually addressing the problem. So then we started thinking, okay, so what are different ways in which we can start thinking about how we can include communities in ways that give real meaning to what is intended in procedural justice? Because this is one of the issues with the Just Transition Framework. It doesn't say how we should do procedural justice. So in the absence of that, people just fall back on the same way of doing things. So we started looking at models of co-production of policy, and we worked around that based very much on our own research method. So we're a research institute affiliated to WITS and the University of Johannesburg, and our main research method is very different from the way in which many organizations that are informing policy will do research in or with communities. So the main way those organizations will do research is with a questionnaire, okay? I think the people who live in Komati have seen so many questionnaires, they never want to see one again as long as they live. The problem with a questionnaire is that when you design a questionnaire, you decide in advance what the problem is, because that determines the questions, okay? You can't find out anything you don't know, because you can't make a question about something you don't know. And just to say at the end, is there anything else you'd like to say, is, really like not a way of doing things. So the way in which we do research and the way in which we managed over a period of a year, and just with 3 researchers out in the field for intermittent periods of time, we managed to highlight many critical issues that had been completely excluded in the energy transition to date, and are now working to get those involved in policy. And our approach is an ethnographic approach. So when you do an ethnography, you have to have skilled researchers, and we've got a great team. When you do ethnographic research, you don't go out making any assumptions about what you know. You start with, even if you are a PhD with 20 years of experience, you go out into the field on the assumption that you don't know anything. You never assume that you know what is going on. And what you do then is you spend time with people listening to them. That's all you do. You just listen to people. A good ethnographic researcher doesn't talk a lot, they listen. And what we do is we listen to people tell us stories about their lives. And through that storytelling, those narratives, so then you start to see over time, if you collect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories about people's lives, you start to understand what is most important for local communities. As one example, in the community of Pola, which is in Emalahleni, the main priority, or one of the main priorities in that community, is in fact the conditions under which children are living in those communities. There's a very high number of very traumatized children in those communities. Child malnutrition is very high. There's nothing for children to do in the community. There are big problems that have been caused by the shift system on the mines, which has generated abuse of alcohol and drugs. And then you start to realize that, in fact, in the whole of Nkangala district municipality, there's only one psychologist for all the government schools put together. There are no places for children that have learning problems. So these are some of the things that are really important to the community that you don't see. We started to realize that there are this vast number of goods and services that are provided by Eskom and the local mines to communities that are vitally important for communities, from playing fields to water supply to roads to support for community initiatives that will completely disappear when those power stations go, but there's no plan to replace that. We also highlighted the issue of water in communities against then the background of the vast amount of water that's used in Eskom power stations. So, when people said, and I'll just wrap up quickly is that we need to improve community participation. What we realized is that that doesn't mean that you need to put every single person in Mpumalanga in a room. Okay, that's not the point. What we need is we need a different way of defining the problem, which means we need to use different kinds of data to understand what the problem is. At the moment, because most of the work is done by sort of economists, people like that, then the only data sets that are considered viable are official data sets. So we look at everybody in Mpumalanga as whether they're employed or unemployed and what sector they work in and what salary they work in. We don't capture the nuances of their lives. And in order to have a better understanding of what the problem is, we don't need to have every single person in the room. What we need to have is a better way of conceptualizing what is important in their lives. And that means we need different ways of collecting information from communities, and we need different ways of making policy that really take those issues into account. Let me stop there.
We said it was a short program, but we did also promise impact, didn't we? Yeah. Tracy, wow, absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for that. Certainly helping one rethink the whole idea of problem solving and how we get to solutions in the first place. Sometimes you get to a solution, you implement, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work. How many examples can you think of that in this country? How many solutions do we have that for whatever reason on paper should work, but in reality, they just don't work? And I think that part of the work that you have done and, you know, the approach to problem solving could well be one of the things that we need to look at more broadly when we're thinking about interventions in any kind of space. So thank you so much for that, Tracy. We're going to continue straight into our panel discussion for this morning. I'm going to ask that we please get, okay, I'm getting an indication from the back. It might suggest that not all of our speakers may be mic'd up, which might be a bit of a problem because we've got quite a number of speakers. Let me just check, do we have handheld mics? All right, so what I'm going to ask them that we do is that we are now going to have to take 5 minutes, only 5 minutes. There is tea and refreshments outside. It's just to get our speakers and opportunities to get mic'd up, and then we'll continue with the program. Testing 1, 2. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask all the speakers, please go to the back of the room in the corner where the sound equipment crew is. All of the speakers for the panel, please go to the back of the room. Everybody else, when we start, we are starting. So go and get your refreshments. You'll talk later. Yes. I was just checking firstly.
When I come next time, I'll be zooming directly to on the community engagement.
No, that's fine. That's not an issue. No, no problem, Mama. That's not an issue. Hi. Come, you can come through. You can come through. Hi, Alex. Frankenstein, Frankenstein.
Don't actually say Frankenstein.
Okay.
It's a so like
Yeah, yeah. Benkenstein. Wonderful. So it's not a silent N. You have to hear it. Benkenstein.
people often make it
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's because of Ansberg. To the front. We're going to be seated when we resume with our program, please. Is it Lynette? Okay, please go and get mic'd up, ma'am. We need to move the program, yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, can we all please get into the room? Let's get settled. We're about to resume with our program. Can everybody please start getting settled? We'll be resuming with our program in the next minute. So, what I wanted to check, we are going to apply to the no problem. Yeah, yeah. Let's see how it goes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask that we all please get settled. We turn down the music, we close the doors, because we are continuing with the program. All right, thank you so much. I trust you enjoyed that tea break. I tried to steal it and snatch it out of your hands, but clearly none of that was going to happen this morning. Thank you all for getting back into the room and resettled as quickly as you have. For all those delegates that are joining us on the virtual platform, a warm welcome back to you too. I trust you're also able to get yourself a quick coffee, whatever your poison of choice is, to keep you going for the rest of our sessions. So we're going to get into our main panel discussion for the day. And I think it's really an opportunity for us to bring much of what we've heard already to life, particularly when we look at the policy gaps that have been touched on today, the research tools that are used, the innovations that also need to reach communities, in particular, poor and marginalized communities. Let me introduce everybody that is sitting on the stage in front of you. I'm going to start on my far right, your left. That is Lynette Meriti, who is with the Africa Development Bank. Sitting next to her is Bertha Chiroro, who is with Gender CC. Next to her is Alex Benkenstein, who is with SAIA, South African Institute of International Affairs. Next to him is Matebe Zobo, who is with Truecaller South Africa. And last but certainly not least, Duduzile Sibia, who is with the Mpumalanga Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environmental Affairs. So these are your panelists for this conversation. Let's please welcome them as they're already seated on stage. Testing 1, 2, wonderful, making sure that I'm on. It's such an important conversation for us to have this morning. I am going to ask that we try and keep our reflections, our inputs as concise as possible. As you can see, we are quite a big panel. And of course, at some point, we also want to give our delegates an opportunity to come in and weigh in on the issues that have come up. All of that can only happen if we all play along in as far as the time is concerned. For the people that are in the room, we are somewhat oversubscribed, but additional chairs have been added to the tables. So if you don't have a chair, just maybe hang around at the back. The organizers are looking out to give anybody a seat that doesn't already have. If you look on your tables, there are registration forms. If you could please kindly fill in those forms so we're able to keep in touch with you beyond this event. Lynette, An important part of the conversation that has come up today has been around how we empower communities, how we empower people to be part of the solutions to their own lives. And I think that with the exhibition that we saw with Mamuswewu, it was such a beautiful example of what is possible when you give communities space to also be in charge of generating the solutions that they've identified to their own problems. But funding, of course, is often a big challenge, in that funding is not always gender responsive, in that funding does not always speak necessarily to the absolute need that exists in communities. Perhaps if you can speak to us about the kind of projects that a bank like the AFDB looks at when you are looking at questions of sustainability and also energy, and what that practically means, not only in urban industrialized areas like Sandton, but what would that mean for a community like that of Mfuleni?
Yeah, thank you very much. Interesting that I think in any discussion around social inclusion, financing always comes up as a key issue. You're very right in that. There's several, let me just start with a little bit of a background. Now, financing can only happen if there's first and foremost the data that gives the business case. So if we don't have data on who, what, how, then that becomes very difficult to actually finance that. But you've also asked me what kind of projects does the African Development Bank finance? I want to say that here in South Africa, one of our strategic areas of focus has been actually the energy transition process. And the bank has looked at financing in several ways. First, through what we call policy-based lending. Now, policy-based lending is when the bank puts money into South Africa's treasury that is not tagged to anything in particular. However, we've got what we call policy triggers that trigger disbursements. And one of the projects that we've just finalized has been focusing specifically on energy targets. Now, this morning I was actually speaking to my colleague and asking what were some of the results that we saw, because when we do policy-based lending, then there will be indicators that we will report on. And she said, actually, we were not able to meet the energy targets. And I said, why? One of the targets was an increase in the free basic electricity to indigent communities. And we didn't meet that target. How can we not meet a target when the government has said there's going to be free basic electricity? But because there's a disconnect maybe between social protection and the energy provision. So who's getting the free basic energy? So municipalities are not able to connect with that policy, even though at the higher level, there's actually the need to provide free electricity. Those that were expected to benefit didn't benefit. So we found, and it's really because of data and targeting and knowing where these people are. So that's like on a bigger macro area. But we also support smaller initiatives. And also happy to hear somebody from Mpumalanga speak, because we have a small project in Mpumalanga where we are supporting just energy transition together with UVU and I think a few other institutions. I believe even the Department of Agriculture, that's also focusing on what does just energy transition mean? It means reskilling, it means retooling, it means new livelihoods. And we actually are supporting, it's a very small project. We have very successful 25 female farmers that have been supported to actually transition into climate smart farming and be able to make resources out of that. Now, beyond that, the bank as a financing institution does work again in terms of, with the private sector. And we do have a program that we call the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, AFAWA. Whilst this program does not do retail lending, because we are a development bank, we cannot lend to individuals, we are able to on-lend to financial institutions that then provide those resources to especially SMEs. And we've got lines of credits with commercial banks in South Africa that are even targeting females, where we have very specific targets for women. But remember, we are not just talking about women, we are talking women just energy. So it's a very, I think it's very intersectional, because it's not just financing, it's women in energy. So we might provide a loan that could go into women SMEs in the industrial development. But I really think maybe more effort needs to be made so that we can even narrow it further to not just women, but women in climate. And I believe that's an area that's coming up.
One
Yeah.
of the challenges, of course, that could arise with the deployment of financing is that once it has to go through the banks,
Yes.
it means that there is a certain level of bankability that anybody who wants access to that financing has to present. And you're quite honest. You say we work on data and we need a business case.
Yes.
Now, if we go back to Mamusweu,
Yes.
she first has to produce, this is my address,
My business registration.
my business registration. Already,
My
just
accounts,
on some
yes.
of those questions, it can be very discriminatory when we look at the people that we're dealing with.
Yes.
How do we ensure that even the restrictions that apply, yes, that very much suit what a bank needs to do in order to cover itself, does not mean that those that are unable to access the system continuously stay in that position? It's a perpetual position. How do we then move to ensure that they're able to get that access? Because that speaks directly to the scalability of any kind of project that is coming through from the people themselves.
Yes, and we have that in mind actually under the AFAWA project. One of the things that we do with the banks is to have them. We actually provide some technical assistance for the banks to develop products that suit the people they are serving. So it's not the typical bank loan that you go for. So the banks have to step down, look at who their client is, and develop a product that suits that. But at the same time, also train that mom from the community on what needs to be ready. So the banks also are now having that responsibility to sit down with this mama and say, this is how we get you ready for you to be bankable. And it's a very difficult situation for us, because we say we want financing to reach the bottom of the pyramid, but at the same time, banks are also faced with their banks. They are banks, so they've got to do their due diligence. So then we say, develop products that are suitable, help the community be able to be bankable.
Bertha, the minute you mention energy, we don't think women.
Yes.
We think male dominance, because unfortunately, the industry itself is still very much a male-dominated industry. And yet, for whatever reason, the face of the impact of a non-just transition is that of women. How do we get the two to meet, the planning, the financing, to reach those that are actually going to be impacted the most?
Yes, thank you very much for that. The energy system and the whole landscape of talking about energy solutions is very much male dominated. And we always think about energy in terms of women being consumers, just because they're going to be cooking. We also want to change the mindset, to start thinking in a different way. How can we begin to see women, persons with disabilities, elderly women, the youth, as producers of energy themselves, the locally led initiatives that we've been seeing within communities. These communities are not just there because they are poor to receive, and a top-down approach does not work. So my thinking is, whilst we want to change talking about the just transition, we need really to talk about power. A just energy transition is our chance to change, to power homes and equality. And it's not just about how we generate energy, but it's change that we must change who holds the power to make those decisions. Those women, those youth, those persons with disabilities, they've got the power to decide on the different solutions that can actually work for them, especially in Mpumalanga. And from what Mam Square's examples they were giving, they've managed to co-create solutions that actually work for them. You understand? And most of the time we're always thinking for them rather than them leading the solutions in changing the dynamics within the just transition. And when decisions are being made there, they're made by those people who also don't understand the needs of those that are actually mostly impacted. So my call is, let those that are mostly impacted drive the energy solutions needs and using whatever they have at their disposal. You heard women saying that they use polystyrene. We throw away polystyrene, isn't it? We throw it away. Women who clean rivers, they now put together the polystyrene, and they know that actually there's someone who is going to be using it in order to make those wonder bags and making something. So it's a whole ripple effect of looking after the environment, and also there are so many core benefits for everybody when we put those that are impacted and those who are mostly in poor in charge of the solutions. Thank you.
What is the mindset shift that you believe needs to take place in order to enable this? If you listen carefully to what Tracy said, she says often experts come in to bring solutions. And yet, in many ways today, we saw, again, through the lens of somebody like Mamusweu, this woman is an engineer and she doesn't even know it, you know, because here are solutions that they're cultivating for themselves. But that requires a mindset change of not seeing those that are perceived as marginalized, as lacking agency, as lacking imagination, as lacking ideas that can equally solve the problems that our society is facing.
I like what you said, changing the mindset. It starts from there because we always see the poor, the ones who are living in poverty, the people who have got disabilities, we call them vulnerable. It's a word that I do not like to use. I would like to use the word underrepresented communities because you don't want them at these tables. At the high tables, we don't want them there. We don't go out there. We are not intentional in terms of finding out what about this? What do they want? Oh, they are vulnerable. They must therefore need 1, 2, and 3. And that's where we are losing it. We've just discovered Mamsko is an engineer. I didn't even know that with that training that she received and lots of others in 2016, she went and designed a biogas digester, which was even totally different from what she was taught, which suits her context to start with. The ones that they were taught were totally different. But did you see the unleashing of skills, the co-creation of skills coming from the bottom up, depending on people's context? And this is where the mindset needs to change. The solutions are not up there. The solutions are right there, where we are all looking down and thinking that there's nothing coming from there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alex, let me come to you. When we think about the context of the T20, and of course this is a T20 event, what we have to also try and ensure is that these learnings become part of the recommendations, become part of the input of what the broader community is going to be looking at. What have you picked up so far that you find will be quite significant for that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe what I can contribute is laying out the territory a little bit in terms of the institutions and processes of the G20, and T20 being an important part of that. this is such a, such a space where there are such powerful stories being told. But I also realize that many of us think about the G20, or we see something on the media or a speech by the president, and there can be a disconnect between how we bring these messages into a process like this. And also a reminder that the G20 is not some world government. It doesn't replace the UN. It doesn't sit above, unfortunately, the system of international politics and power dynamics that shape so much of what we do and the environment in which we act. So the T20 is one of 13 engagement groups of the G20. And it brings together think tanks, NGOs, people working in the research, science to policy community. The idea of the T20 is to have strategic reflections, bring research into an engagement with the G20 agenda, and then hopefully influence the outcomes of the G20 process. There are very important debates and discussions happening in these other engagement groups as well. Civil 20, there's a woman 20, a youth 20. These are all important entry points for the discussion. The T20 works in a very structured way in terms of bringing messaging into the G20 process. It organizes itself in terms of task forces each year. There is a task force that deals with energy transition and climate change issues. There've been multiple engagements, a midterm conference, a T20 Africa dialogue, and all of these feed into output processes. These task forces develop communiques, position statements. Now, in one sense, and this is always a challenge with the G20, because remember, every year there's a different G20 presidency. There's no permanent secretariat. That creates a lot of opportunity for the country, like South Africa in this case, to shape how it wants to drive the G20 process, but it creates a massive timing problem, because all of these engagement groups are having strategic discussions, trying to develop policy documents. That takes time. The risk is that by the time the engagement groups are ready with their inputs, the G20 negotiations happening between the different ministries, government officials, they've already negotiated the outcome. And it's been such a difficult process that really the opportunity to then bring in additional insights, additional messaging later into the process, it gets narrower and narrower. That being said, these engagement groups provide very important opportunities to build networks, to elevate messaging. So just very quickly, I don't want to take up, again, too much time, but we need to think very strategically about our entry points. There are certain things that one can do in terms of engaging directly with the working groups and identifying which working groups are most relevant for the work. There are at least 3 that deal very directly with this issue of just transition. It's the Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group, coordinated under DEFI, the Energy Transitions Working Group, coordinated by the Department of Energy and Electricity, and the Sustainable Finance Working Group, coordinated by Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank. But in addition to these working groups, there's the engagement directly with the G20 leadership, of course, in the Sherpa track, represented by Dirko. And there are a variety of technical partners that have already been appointed and are working on technical papers. These are also important entry points. I know, for example, that there's an outfit in South Africa called Southern Transitions, which has been commissioned by the department to develop a technical paper dealing with how do we think about just transitions, not exclusively in the energy sector, but also beyond the energy sector. Engaging with these technical partners is also an important entry point. And so there's the entry point question, and then there's also the outcome point. And we do sometimes put too much emphasis in the G20 on, can we get particular wording in the final leaders' declaration or in the communique or ministerial statement that comes out of these working groups. That is important, and any opportunity we have to get that messaging across, we should take advantage of. But there are multiple outcomes in terms of potential legacy initiatives. If we think about the Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger that was launched by the Brazilians last year under their G20 presidency, there is input into these technical reports themselves. I realize a lot of this, it's hard to paint all of this in the space of 5 minutes, but I want to give some flavor of, there's a whole discussion around, like we like to say in South Africa, strategy and tactics that need to take place in terms of messaging. But I can say that in terms of the T20, our institute, SAI, is one of the hosts of the T20 this year. There is ongoing dialogue with multiple working groups, with DIRCO. The fact that this is a T20 side event means that the messaging can be incorporated into our engagements with government officials. There are opportunities to profile the work and reports and messaging through the T20 website. So again, there's multiple points of entry, and certainly I can say that, there's a commitment from SAI to make sure that we facilitate that as much as we can.
When you started off speaking, part of what you did is just point to the gap that often exists with such a big event like the G20 and everybody that's sitting in this room, right? Because yes, the G20 is happening. We're hosting it as South Africa under South African presidency. But to many South Africans, it still feels like something that's happening out there. It's their G20. They'll tell us what happens. And opportunities like this conversation, of course, give platforms for people to be much closer to the process. Now, how far does that opportunity stretch? I hear you on the technical work that is being done. And of course, we both know that once we're talking technical, things have to be cleaned up. A document needs to come looking, sounding in a particular way. But how do we ensure that the essence of what is being shared here is not lost in the technicalities, and that the solutions that are needed to this problem is carried through in the way that we're hearing it, expressed by the people that are affected by it the most?
Absolutely. Very true. No, it's true. I mean, the G20, when we think of the G20, we think of big multilateral processes, big conferences, everyone in their business attire, and high-level speeches. Again, there are those opportunities. Civil 20 is one of those. So this is something that was initiated under the Brazilian G20 presidency, the Social 20, I mean, which brings together multiple engagement groups and creates that platform. Again, that provides some element of access and voice. The risk, again, is often that comes quite late in the process. So in terms of influencing outcomes, there are some challenges related to that. But I think, again, it's working with, I know that there's discussions in the Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group around bringing in case studies and narratives, stories into the work, into the discussion. This is now moving completely into a different field, but I just want to give a tangible example. It's not related to energy transition at all, but at the recent meeting of the Environment and Climate Sustainability Working Group of the G20, it was actually hosted in Kruger National Park, and that environment created a space where there could be very tangible and direct discussions around how community impacts and the questions around biodiversity and social benefits to our communities can happen. And there was some demonstration projects that took place as part of that, which spoke very eloquently to some of these challenges, but also opportunities in that particular space. So I think there are these windows that can be taken advantage of to bring these really tangible stories and the human dimension into what can often seem very esoteric and high level and perhaps technical discussions.
Matebe, to come to you, We started this conversation talking about the issue of financing and access to financing. Any data set that you look at that is focused on women and women entrepreneurs, it'll tell you that number one, women struggle the most when it comes to accessing funding. But number two, within a period of 1 to 3 years, that those initial years of starting any kind of new venture, women are the ones that are most likely to fail. They don't fail because they're women, but they fail because there are complexities that simply are not appreciated, even in those that come on board to help them with their businesses. But that's not the whole story. There are, of course, other stories of women that have been incredibly successful, and we should recognize as being in spite of, right, despite the challenges. Any examples you want to share with us this morning?
Great. Thank you, everybody. And thanks again for the opportunity. I actually want to take a step back and start off with a provocation, right? I want us to think of this moment for a little bit. What if the just energy transition is South Africa's most significant unifying economic opportunity? And I say that in response to the Naledi story that we heard earlier on. It cannot be business as usual, right? And we've reflected on this a little bit, because when you even think of finance and just the efforts we're trying to make from a finance perspective, it cannot be that we're still deploying old business models to fit new narratives around, for example, climate change, right? Or even getting us into a situation where we fund women-owned led businesses from an energy perspective. But I want us to take it a little bit further to say that the just energy transition is actually not just about energy. It's really about multiple industries and sectors coming together to transition to a new form of energy altogether. Now, if you think about what the steam engine did for the first industrial revolution, that's how we should be thinking about it. If you're thinking about how artificial intelligence is now reshaping how we work and think and live, this is how we should be thinking about just energy transition. And I actually dare say that this is South Africa's life-saving moment to get the 30 years that we've had of democracy right. Because if we do not address poverty at this point, we do not address the gaps of that exist in finance for women-owned businesses, et cetera, and we don't sort of redesign our ecosystem to rise to the occasion, then we're absolutely lost. Now, I know why you're asking me that question around entrepreneurship, because I worked in the entrepreneurship sector for many, many years, leading telecom future makers and other enterprise and supply development programs, and currently in the digital space with Truecaller. And I'd like us to think about it in this way. The first is, and actually we need our own T20 that is focused on South Africa. I mean, I love the G20 process. I think it's brought together some of the most brilliant minds, but I really do think it's still very much high level. And we need to actually take that framework and think about how do we bring all of these brilliant minds, but to tackle South Africa's pressing issues, right? And so back to this G20 energy, just energy transition. I think what matters the most for us is to think about it broadly in two ways. The first is coal dependent or coal producing areas such as Mpumalanga. We have to acknowledge that they have to be enabled to diversify the economies, right? So we need to think about agro-processing, tourism. We need to think beyond energy, right? Energy projects are great, absolutely, but we need to think beyond energy in these areas. And then secondly, we need to think about how we integrate any renewable energy sort of businesses or skills or jobs into the value chains of provinces like the Northern Cape, right, where renewable energy will be the hub, will be sitting in those provinces. So we need to think about value chain integration. And to do that, it's actually multiple, right? So there's a skilling conversation, there's a clear skilling conversation, then there's a women sort of conversation which must be gender responsive from a skilling perspective, and not only women but also youth, right? And then there's a conversation about digital platforms and how we showcase some of the work we've seen already. So the work that Mamusho is doing in Mfuleni, that should be on a digital platform, right? And today when we think about digital platform or digital, we're thinking social media. But I think the question is, how do we empower women, right? How do we empower youth? How to empower children? How to empower women and youth to ensure that they are understanding of the digital platforms that exist for them, and how to use devices in such a way that they can gain access to skills, right? And then back to the data points from a women financing perspective, absolutely. Once you use digital platforms to collect different data points about women's businesses. I mean, we've seen it in agro businesses, for example, where you can use IoT to collect data points about a crop, right? Or data points about behavior. Once you have access to those alternative ways of collecting data, then for the first time, you're able to rise to the occasion that is required of us to completely re-engineer our systems to be fit for purpose for this moment.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive contribution, Matebe. Let me come to you, Duduzile, in a very practical sense, because under the Department of Mpumalanga, you, of course, are tasked with the implementation of some of these very projects. And perhaps just at a very high level, some of the learnings that you have made with the projects that you've implemented alongside the IISD and the South African partners.
Thank you very much. I think my colleagues have covered most of the extensive things that I wanted to say. But if you check basically, maybe just to give a background a little bit, why in Mpumalanga? Because it looks like every person is ISI in Mpumalanga. In Mpumalanga, basically, we are the energy generation hub. We have 11 power stations. One has been decommissioned, as you know, Komati. And with that power station, 83% of the mining activities are happening in Mpumalanga. And 87% electricity is being generated in Mpumalanga. And if you just check basically on that one, 50% of South African greenhouse gas emissions are coming from Mpumalanga. So meaning that that's why the focus is more on Mpumalanga. We are ground zero basically. But on that side, with the IISD, they've assisted us in reviewing our climate change adaptation strategy. When we are looking at that, currently there's a lot of disconnection between just energy transition, and climate change. So because there is no connection, basically we are trying to say, let us reconnect. Why are we transitioning? So if we start asking ourselves that question, it becomes much more simpler because we are in a state of our biodiversity degradation in a very high level. Our existence and we are approaching extinction basically. That meaning that we have to look into it to say, how can we come up with the new innovations that are pure? So if you check basically on that one, when we were reviewing that strategy, we're with labor organizations. I think Lebohang indicated very well. They indicated to say, we don't see any just transition in that climate change strategy. So we want just transition to be there. Because more than anything, when you look at a just transition, is associated with the climate change mitigation, but not on the adaptation side, where we are missing the nature-based solutions, initiatives that we can come up with. Already we are sitting with a lot of rehabilitated land that is being mined and then is rehabilitated. We can't utilize it above and beyond in looking at the nature-based solution, like the botanical garden conservation, and because it can create sustainable jobs that are going to last forever. But at the same time, if we are looking at that, we came up with a just transition phase 1 plan. Because more than anything, we realize that we are taking experiences internationally, but not looking at the ground root to say, what are your challenges basically? So the just transition phase 1 plan, it was developed from the bottom up. where they indicated to say that we want a social dialogue to be extensively covered. We want gender to be extensively covered. But they indicated to us to say, yes, they do understand with gender, but we would rather say vulnerable groups. Because like elderly, people with disability, youth, women, they are all vulnerable, and including our municipalities. So therefore, after that, we coin all those things in together, and then after that, come up with a certain, and then after that, they indicated governance. They said, because people are at the center of just transition, if governance is left behind, we'll be talking like this, saying that government, you're not doing your job. Ourselves, as we are sitting as government, we say we are doing a lot of job. So somewhere, somehow, that talk, it will just like it discredit. Because in the just transition, I've noticed that there are a lot of Spider-Mans that are coming in. And then says like, we can do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whereas if we come collectively, all of us, and then see where do we really need to hit this big elephant, where do we need to start eating it? But at the same time, each and every person wants to be shining there and there. So somewhere, somehow, this creates a challenge. In the economic diversification, as we are saying that, basically, we are not looking at just energy transition as government. We are looking at just transition. Because the just element is what the community start playing about. I remember one guy getting into the room to say, we are just here. We are just moving. We are just, because it has lost that kind of a component of the justice. Why are we doing this just transition?
Sure.
So meaning that we have to go back and look at, say, as government, as partners, how can we emphasize more on the justice element? Because that is the kind of key. Because that justice, it will give dignity. Because we have lost that kind of a dignity with our community. We have lost that confidence, we have lost that trust. So how do we really emphasize on that? There are a series of projects that has already started. We are working closely with our partners. We have one, especially on the gender. We have the gender equality and inclusivity that is supported by the World Bank. On that one, plus or minus, women-led SMMEs have been supported, and then plus or minus 40 women have been supported, and now they're coming up. We don't want to change their project, but we say, how can we make it greener? How can we make it climate smart and be innovative on that one? Because all of us, we are not going to be shifting to energy. Because on the renewable energy, we have to count to say how many jobs are going to be created on that one. It is not the equivalent of the jobs that are going to be lost in the coal value chain. So we have to strike that kind of a balance. I fully agree with my colleague when he says like, we have to look beyond and be above. So in our strategy, we have that economic diversification where we look against 10 climate technologies like circular economy, nature-based solution, and then all these other ecotourism. Because we are closer to Kruger National Park, we are very much blessed. So these are the kind of issues. And at the same time, we are more in collaboration now with the African Development Bank. I think Tracy has indicated that, but now we said like, when we are creating jobs, or when we are training people, let us train for purpose. That when you train a person, let that person be absorbed in a job. Rather than like training a person sitting at home, flagging your certificate, but it doesn't work. So these are the issues that we are trying to avoid as much as we can by only not looking only on the energy side, but looking at the diversification of economy so that everybody could be absorbed. And then at the same time, we are looking to say that whatever is being created, whether it's in a circular economy, let it be decent. Let it have a value that when I'm getting out and work, coming up with that. Why can't we do a waste processing plant? Why can't we do these other issues rather than seeing people collecting waste that we are disposing, haphazardly saying that we are creating jobs? Look at these jobs that if, let's take for instance, we were concretizing it into a business, it was going to come up in that. So if you check, basically, we have a project in our department we call ZIP and then Zonda Insila, whereby most of the people now are being appointed in those kind of jobs, even if it's a stipend, but it makes a difference in their lives. Basically, we are targeting 200 now.
they are starting, and in this project, it could go that now waste is being utilized as a resource, no longer a whatever. And then at the same time, but if you check basically in all these other issues, we realize that we have to protect what we have. There's a social, ecological justice that we need to do as Mpumalanga so that we can ratify all those other things. I think so far there are a lot of issues that are already happening.
All right. Thank you again for that input. I'm looking at the time, and can you believe it? We're already at the end of our allocation for this conversation. With the little time that remains, I think there's a lot that has been said, and no shortage, I think, of problems and issues that need to be addressed. But there's this very important saying that I like. It says, when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And so at some point, picking up on what Duduzile was saying, thinking through solutions to the very end. So not just from ideation, but literally to what is the outcome out of this process. So within that context then, if I'm to give each of you about 40 seconds to say, taking away and taking out of this conversation, what is the focused effort that needs to be applied in relation to this conversation? And maybe even what are clear goals for you that need to be set in order to ensure that we are really dealing with the problem? You can either choose the effort or the goal. Let me start on that end of the room.
Okay.
Very briefly for me, please.
The goals, job creation, especially focusing on young men and women as well, because of the loss of jobs. Goal number 2, skills development in the renewable energy and clean energy space, reskilling. Number 3, improved livelihoods.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me put it this way, in terms of the just transition itself, we need to be thinking about a broader system change. It's about who is part of the new clean economy that generates jobs, decent jobs, opportunities for each and everyone within the community. There's no one size fits all model that will work for us. And also collaboration with each and everybody, the private sector, the communities that are below, that we see as vulnerable and underrepresented. Let's partner, let's drive this process. This is our time to make that change. And it's important that we take this opportunity to create the change that we want to see. And it must be community driven and pro-poor. Thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, for me, I think echoing that, it comes down to bridging some of these disconnects that we've spoken about. Disconnects between the lived realities of our communities and the discussions happening maybe at high-level politics. Disconnect, let's admit it, also sometimes between our communities and our institutions at multiple levels. And I think there are real opportunities to do that. I think what we've heard today is there are multiple pathways to impact. There are multiple arenas through which this change can be facilitated. The G20 is one such arena, but as I've tried to communicate, even within the G20, there are all these subdivisions and different paths one can take. And expressing power, or shall I say, engaging with a system, you have to be strategic, but at the same time, you've got to think very carefully about those multiple points of action. So I think that bridging function and bringing a focus into this engagement to really make sure that at the end of the day, there's tangible impact for the communities.
Matebe?
Right, so I would say let's focus on skilling on a scalable perspective. And by doing that, we are looking at digital skills. we're looking at digital platforms, right? So provide, and this is for both communities where coal is a main driver of that economy and they need diversification. And then for communities where there'll be renewable energy hubs. So the key thing there is to provide skills, training at a mass level using digital platforms, using phones, and making sure that everybody has access to devices, has access to the right content. You're partnering with TVET colleges, you're partnering with NGOs. So it's basically integrating our education system, or rather integrating this narrative into our education system so that we've got a great pathway for jobs and a great pathway for livelihoods.
Thank you for that. Duduzile?
I agree more with my colleagues. I cannot repeat what they've said, but what I normally say, I so wish we could come to Komati just to see the progress that has been made. Other people are saying there's nothing that has happened. There's a lot that has happened. Community are taking ownership, and then there's inclusivity, and then there's governance, and then more than anything, let us partner more. It's what I could say.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. Thank you all so much. You can take your seats. Thank you. A big thank you to our panelists for all of the insights that they've shared. Okay, I'm going to ask everybody, let's calm down. We're almost there, I promise, we're almost there. Thank you so much for those insights. I think it was a dynamic panel that was put together that really shared information from such different lenses, but I think we're all the better for it. We've come towards the end of our program. The last thing that remains before we go off to lunch and networking, so those conversations, let's pause them just for a little bit longer. While I welcome onto stage, she says she's not Nkateko, but she is according to the program. Let me welcome Isabel. She's clearly going to be the one who's going to just give us a summary of our event today and also tell us what it is that we can look forward to. Isabel. There should be one on the table.
Thanks. It was actually me who asked the tech guys to take them down. I forgot you were all mic'd up. So I will be brief. The funny thing is, as soon as you get the microphone, you lose all perspective of time. So when you're sitting and going, this person doesn't stop talking, you think you've only just begun. But I will look at all your faces and see the passage of time passing. So firstly, I just want to thank you, Kathy. It's amazing. I have known and worked with Kathy for a few years now. Let's not give away that. And I've just loved the way that you bring a humanity, whether you're sitting in studio, it's very exciting being on TV with her, or hearing you like this, your ability to stop and to take that broader perspective, but to really hone it down in humanity is something which I always appreciate. So thank you for bringing that to our event and making it real. Thank you. And who knows, you might be getting invitations from global partners to be traveling around. She's also got twins who 2.5. So, I mean, can you imagine, in addition to everything else? And she was on air sort of like until the last minute, and then again after about 6 weeks. So anyway, superhuman woman. I want to say thanks to begin with, and then I'll just be very brief in synopsis and future steps. So it was about 4 months ago that I reached out to IISD. I had to Google what IISD stood for first, and then asked whether they would consider partnering with us on a T20 event on just energy and the gendered perspective. And I want to thank you, many Zoom meetings later. I also want to thank Mail and Guardian for making this happen so professionally in the tech team. We have a WhatsApp group that has not stopped going. So when you think about what we've been doing, there's always something we've brought up. I want to thank our partners who have come from far afield, from communities as well as from across the world to be here. I think for me, what's really stood out in this conversation is the catalyst for change and opportunity and the developments that have existed. Thinking about what the panel has said as well, the need for new models of development. And Kathy's provocation, located in Mama Swear's proof of policy actually, is that the solutions exist. But how do we make sure that they are brought into policy spaces? I think Alex's reflection that from the T20 perspective and other G20 platforms, these lived realities are not always there. And I love the integrity with which these stories were brought up. The point about participation is not being seen, it's being heard. And on that, I do have to apologize that we ran out of time for questions and answers. But I hope that you feel that that the presentations captured your own perspectives to an extent. And then the just injustice, unjust transitions, which has been missing and will be missed unless people are placed at the heart of the just transitions. I think, Lebogang, thank you not only for being here, but for staying throughout. I think as people rise in the kind of importance index, their attendance is more and more limited to their own presentation, and then they slip out. But it's been a sign of true humility and openness that you've been here. So thank you for that. Where do we go from here? We are going to be developing a policy brief from the recommendations and the inputs. I think also, just to Cindy, from just the whole learnership, the program of how things are done, the making visible the invisible. I mean, the challenge around how do you prove your address if you're living in an informal settlement in order to get financing? Those are the real things that we need to be surfacing and showing solutions. The aim of today was not to hear the problems. It was to recognize the challenges and to bring the solutions to bear. So we hope that those have come through. And in addition to that, I liked the roadmap that Alex drafted about the multiple points of entry. And as Oxfam, we are part of the C20 and the Y20 as well. So we will be using those opportunities to push some of the solutions here forward. But then I think just in final closing, what I've heard time and time again today was we're not just gathering because of the G20 or for the G20. The G20 is mobilizing us to come together and to work together and to hear each other's stories. Will we all be coming to Komati? Yes, there we go. Because it might be the most over-researched town in the whole of South Africa, but we want to see the solutions and to hear from local government there that solutions are working, I think is something that we need to replicate. So no more bad news, we bring the good news. Thank you very much. And before you leave and do the networking, Lerato, where are you going to take the photograph? Okay, if you could please gather all your things, and there's a phone here as well, but we want to have a photograph so that when we look back in 5-10 years time, when the twins are grown up and they want to see what their mom looked like, and we can share that, and we will share that to everybody who's registered. So thank you very much to everybody. Photograph, food, fun.
Hey.